Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 5 and we are going to present on online learning during the pandemic in terms of understanding of metaphor in critical discourse analysis. I am Nur Sharmimi Shuhada binti Saifol with metric number 1811222. Will be presenting on the introductions and also COVID-19 metaphor maps. First thing first, in introduction, we need to understand all the terms used in a topic to make sense of metaphor understandings in critical discourse analysis. So the first one is pandemic COVID-19. It is a novel coronavirus first documented in Wuhan, China in December 2019. Coronaviruses are zoonotic viruses where it can easily transmitted from animal to humans and spread via droplets produced from the respiratory system by coughing and also sneezing. Pandemic or COVID-19 has affected the whole world in all fields, including education. So online learning is an education that takes place over the internet, where students can access to learning materials at any time, any place, and it's proven to remove geographical obstacles. So living in pandemic or living in lockdown, online learning has been the only option left for us to continue our study, to finish our study, or even to further our study. Meanwhile, for understanding of metaphor in critical discourse analysis, there are two accounts of metaphor, which are conceptual metaphor theory, CMT, and also conceptual blending theory, CBT. So conceptual metaphor theory is a theory that allows speakers to talk about abstract phenomena or emotion in terms of more concrete experiences. Meanwhile, conceptual blending theory, it's a broader range of possibilities of projection where small conceptual packets are constructed as we think and talk for purpose of local understanding and action. They are interconnected and can be modified as thought and discourse unfold.
Next, here comes the methodology part. We use a qualitative research method where we focus on obtaining and analyzing data. As per instruction, we had 20 articles which have been divided equally, and then we went through skimming and scanning process. Here, we read thoroughly the article and then we take out the text that contain metaphor context, and then we put them under each categories, and then we discuss and came up with 5 categories, which are COVID-19, ODL, advantages, disadvantages, and solutions. After that, we categorize it under CMT and CBT. After we have studied and do the analysis, we do the mapping, and we do the mapping accordingly to CMT and CBT metaphor mapping. And then after that, we have chosen the best one to be presented in this video.
For category 1, COVID-19 metaphor maps, there are two metaphors that we have found in the articles. The first one is ground to a halt, and the second one is took the world by surprise. Both of these metaphors that we have found for category 1 are under CMT or conceptual metaphor theory. And I will be explaining on took the world by surprise. The source domain for this metaphor is took and the target domain is surprise. So for took, it can be understood as get hold of or making sense of surprise. It is a feeling after grasping the situation. Means that both of this can be understood or can be related to a sense of holding of something. Means that took is a literal meaning of holding of something, holding of or holding to something. Meanwhile, for surprise is a feeling of grasping or hold the situation. Took and surprise can be related in terms of scene, where for took, it is described as a scene or a sequence. Meanwhile, for surprise, it is a feeling that resulted from an unexpected scene, means something that a scene that never in our mind, we never really thought of it. And the next one for took, it is capture or remove. Meanwhile, for surprise, it is can be understood as contain attention and feelings. Meanwhile, remove expected feelings, means that the understanding of capture is still there in surprise, which is contain or capture attention and feelings. And when remove, it also makes sense of the feeling surprise, where it remove expected feelings. And last but not least, for took, the result of took is absence and loss. Meanwhile, the result of surprise is unexpectedness and shock. So in these two, we can still see the interrelated or interconnected of the feelings, or the understanding of both took and surprise.
Okay, so now let's move on to the second category of our map, which is on online learning. So as can be seen in this slide, this is a map of conceptual blending theory, ACBT. So the data that we choose for this map is, as can be seen in the bottom of the map, which sounds, Ford said there are differing opinions among those on the science table as to whether or not schools should be reopened. So this particular text, the metaphor map that we found, is on the phrase science table. Okay, so now let's move on to the map itself. The map, this conceptual blending theory map, it consists of few aspects in it, such as the input 1, input 2, generic space, and also blend. And the final result will be on input 3. So science table, let's see this phrase. Okay, this phrase, it consists of two different concepts, which means science and table. They are what I meant by different is that they are just the same. They're nouns, but then the meaning itself, they are different. For science is something that are subtle. We don't know. It can be people. It can be theories. It can even be tools from the experiment labs, and other stuff. Theories in science and all that. While for input 2, the table itself, as we know, table is something that it's a thing. It can be a cabinet. It can be a cabinet. It can be a desk, something that we eat on it, something that we write on it, and many other things that can be related to table. So now let's move on to the generic space. This generic space is where we try to analyze and we try to connect those two inputs with the data itself, with the text itself, meaning that we have to kind of paraphrase, and then we have to make it sounds more relatable. So now, if you have think of that, so it says that Ford said there are differing opinions among those on the science table. Among those on the science table actually refers to the people of scientists. Those scientists who make research on COVID-19, who have data on COVID-19, and Ford believe that the scientists are still differing in their opinions. I mean, like, they are still arguing, they are still debating whether the schools should be reopened or not during this COVID-19 pandemic. So that is how we try to think in the generic space, and then it will become a blend. So the blend itself is the science table. Okay, so after all the process of thoughts and all that, it will lead to the input 3, which is the people and refers to a group of scientists. And the sentence itself, the data itself, will come up with a meaning of, Ford said there are differing opinions among those of the scientists as to whether or not schools should be reopened.
In the category advantages, we have the next CMT metaphor map, which discussing on connective tissues. And then we can see there is the source domain, which is connective, as it is quite concrete, and then the target domain is a little bit abstract, which is tissues, which is quite not concrete, that we cannot really see how it works, because the literal meaning of tissue is something that is in our body. Like what we have learned, source domain is a source structure, meanwhile target domain is a conceptual structure. And then here we could see the source domain, which is the word connective in the literal meaning or the literal context, brings the meaning of to link or to connect words and phrases in linguistic units, in linguistic context. Meanwhile, for the target domains, which is tissues, which we cannot see what tissues work as in our body, how do they form the bundle of tissues or maybe nerves, fibers to form into a new organs or a new tissue, and then we can relate it to the actions of the source domain itself, which is to connect or to maintain or to link. And then here the metaphoric expression in the target domain is to tell the progress, like it's quite abstract, like what do they do, the tissues, what are they doing in our body, and then what are the effect in our body, which is to provide support or maybe to bind together to protect other tissues and organs. And then here it is related to each other, it links to each other, and then from there it could be seen that the relation between two concepts set up the links or the mappings between those specific elements in the source domain and linking to the target domains in one way, and it leads to the result where the metaphoric expression could be seen in the source domain, saying that if fragmentation happens during the process or the progress of connecting, it will cause confusion where it links to the target domain, the attack, which is damages, which will lead to bad consequences. For example, in this context, like tissues, it will face maybe fatal consequences.
Okay, so now let's move on to the next category, the fourth one, which is on the disadvantages of online learning metaphor map. So for this category, it is a CBT map, a conceptual blending theory, where the text that we chose for this particular category is on the bottom of the map. It sounds like this. Disebabkan ini, kata beliau, para pelajar yang memerlukan konsultasi bersama para pensyarah mempunyai ruang yang sangat terhad untuk berbuat demikian. So where is the metaphor part? The metaphor part that can be found from this text is on the phrase ruang yang sangat terhad. Now let us see how it is different, how they are different in meanings. So ruang yang sangat terhad in English, it's basically mean limited space. However, limited space, this text does not really mean limited space as in a room or something, maybe in a house, or maybe the memory inside your phone. That is not how it's meant by limited space. So let us put this phrase into the two inputs, the input 1 and input 2. So the first input, we put the ruang space, and the second input, we put the terhad limited. Now let us think in the generic space. This is the part where we have to analyze, where we have to relate this particular phrase with the text itself. So the generic space, it basically means ruang yang sangat terhad is actually the time itself, the time that the students don't have enough time to actually consult with the lecturers, which also means ruang yang sangat terhad. They don't have much space, they don't have much time to actually consult with their lecturers, since these time classes are all online. So if it's blended, it will become again ruang yang sangat terhad. Anyhow, this ruang yang sangat terhad actually means something else. We cannot see this phrase in a literal way, because if it's in a literal way, it will be totally different with the context and it is not relatable at all. So ruang is something vacuum. It can be compact, it can be emptied, while for terhad it actually means insufficient, poorly in amount, also that it's very restricted and all that. So let's after we have analyzed the phrase, and also after we have trying to relate the phrase with the data, we will come out with the final result, which is on the input 3. So input 3 will become limited or insufficient time. So from this input 3, now let's paraphrase the sentence to a better one. So disebabkan ini, kata beliau, para pelajar yang memerlukan konsultasi bersama para pensyarah mempunyai masa yang terhad untuk berbuat demikian. So that is how the map is constructed.
Finally, we have the last category, which is solution category. And we have the CBT map with the metaphor of quick and dirty survey. The implicit meaning behind quick and dirty is to show something that is done in a very hasty manner and to give an answer or solution in a very short period of time without very detailed analysis. As we can see in input 1, the word quick is the domain of speed, and it shows how fast or to show the quickness of things being done. And in input 2, we can see the word dirty as the domain of results or consequences. In the speed domain, the blend is the quickness or how fast things are being done, or the short duration of how things are being done, and it shows that it is not always nice and it is not always good. The harsh word for it would be lousy. And meanwhile, in the domain of result, which shows the consequences, by using the word dirty, the blend is indecent, devious, or unpleasant to show the result of something that is being done hastily or in a quick manner. The metaphoric expression in the second domain, or the domain of results or consequences, shows a selective projection in this context in the generic space, where it talks about a condition or a consequences or something that is not being done thoroughly would lead to such a bad consequences, which means if you put, let's say, 1% effort into something, then your result would be also 1% or not less. So the blend shows that something that is quick means not thorough cross map with the dirty domain or the input 2, which projects indecent result or consequences.
Okay, so now we have come to the last part of the video, which is on the conclusion. So I'm just going to conclude briefly what we have done so far and how this whole project has impacted our group. So in metaphor, it consists of two theories, the CBT and also the CMT, conceptual blending theory and also the conceptual metaphor theory. So these theories, we managed to practically apply it through our process, and somehow by doing this practical, we in-depth understanding gained throughout the process. What we did was that we found the data, we found the sources from online resources such as online articles and also online announcements on COVID-19 online distance learning. So whatever text we found that is relatable, that consists any metaphors in it, we took out the we chose the text and then we took out the metaphor, and later on we analyzed each metaphor using the two concepts CBT and CMT. So all these concepts, when we started to practically use the concept, we get to know that metaphors are not only metaphors in literal, such as running cats and dogs. It is more beyond that. It can be something like very subtle, or maybe like a very short word, and that can also be a metaphor if we use the concept of CBT and CMT thoroughly throughout the text. And other than that, we also, the huge impact that we realized for our group is that we get to know more how exactly metaphors are used in discourse terms, or maybe somehow we can find metaphors even in a discussion or even in a conversation with a friend. For example, if your friend is saying something like "my mind's blowing," that does not mean that her mind is going to blow up, her mind is going to explode. It means something like maybe she has something in her thoughts, in her brain, that makes her mind keep thinking, or something that is very impressive, something that is very amusing, and that makes her mind want to explode, but not in a literal way. So in in conclusion, that somehow helps us to, we find that metaphors are very aesthetic. It's very fun to know more. But as long as we understand the two concepts of metaphors, CBT and CMT, inshallah, we will manage to get to know more metaphors in whatever sources that we find that we read. So that's all from us. Thank you for watching.